Welcome to Expats Everywhere. Can you tell us your name, where you're from, and a little bit about yourself?
My name is Emily. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and I'm a teacher in international schools. I teach elementary, and this is my 4th year teaching.
And what countries have you taught in?
So I lived in Venezuela for 3 years, and I'm now living in Singapore.
What was it like living and working in Venezuela?
I really loved Venezuela. It was a great place for me to grow as a person and as a teacher, and I really enjoyed the people that I met there.
Did you know anyone else who wasn't a teacher but also an expat?
Yes, I would say the majority of people I knew who weren't teachers were missionaries there or worked in an embassy of some sort.
Okay, so as a teacher, what did a typical day look like for you?
So I worked in an international school, and so my day looked pretty typical for a teacher. And we taught all in English and all the subjects. And so a typical day was starting school around 7:30, being done around 2:30, and going home from there. So.
Were most of your students expats as well, or from Venezuela?
Most of my students were growing up in Venezuela, but their families were not Venezuelan. And so a lot of my students were born in Venezuela, but their parents did not originally come from there.
How much can someone expect to earn as a teacher in Venezuela?
I think it really depends on the organization, the school you work for. I worked for a school where I made less money than most other schools, but I would say most international schools pay very similar to a US salary for a teacher.
Is that enough money to live in Venezuela? What kind of lifestyle can you have?
Yeah, I would say the cost of living in Venezuela is pretty cheap. It's pretty cheap to live there. I would say you can live what we would consider an upper class lifestyle for fairly cheap with the way the money works there.
And how much can someone expect to save from their salary?
I would say that depends on how much you want to travel outside of Venezuela. If you stay in Venezuela, you're not going to spend very much money, but traveling to and from Venezuela can be more expensive because there's not frequent airline flights going in and out of Venezuela, and so they tend to be more expensive. But I would say if you're staying within Venezuela, you can probably save a lot.
If someone's moving there for the first time, how much money should they bring with them to get started?
I would say for a single person, I would say between $500 and $1,000 would be a good startup cost, plus the cost of an airline ticket to go there. I would say that would be your biggest cost to get started going there, is just simply the airline ticket, and then from there, buying your things that you're going to bring with you, and then once you're there, the things that you would buy there.
What does a monthly budget look like?
It's really hard to budget in Venezuela because prices constantly change, and so it's hard to predict how much money you're going to spend. But with inflation, also your salary will go further, and so I would say you can live anywhere from $200 to $300 a month.
How much is rent there?
I honestly don't know because I didn't pay rent. I would say most expats who live in Venezuela, housing is part of their package, as it was for me, because housing is difficult to come by in Caracas, and it's very complicated to pay rent and do all of the different logistical things that happen with living. And so I would say most expats don't find their own place to live, but their sending agency would help them with that.
And did you live by yourself, or did you have a roommate?
So I lived with between 1 to 3 people in a house, and so my school had a house that we all lived in, and we all had different apartments within the house.
What would you say you spent the most money on while you were there?
Food. I would say just going out, eating out. I would say that's what we do for fun mostly there, is eat out, and then travel.
Okay, if someone's moving there, what are some things that they should pack, and what's the weather like?
The weather is one of the best things about Venezuela. It's consistently a warm spring temperature. It's typically between the mid-70s to the mid-80s all year round. And there's rain, but it rains maybe for 20-30 minutes at a time, and then it's done. And so it's not the type of rain where you need to be prepared for rain all day. And so I would say packing-wise with clothing, people in Venezuela typically wear jeans and t-shirts. Typically people dress fairly fancy, but once again, like jeans and high heels is considered fancy, and so that's pretty simple. And then pretty much going to Venezuela, any type of personal care item that you would need, shampoo, soap, anything really that you can think of for personal care, you would want to bring with you because it's difficult to find there.
Is it hard to find things like shampoo, or it's hard to find certain brands?
It's hard to find at all.
At all, okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else besides personal care items that you would recommend people bring?
I would recommend people bring any sort of foods that they can't live without. So food in Venezuela is typically pretty plain. So basically I ate a lot of vegetables and chicken, and then going from there adding spices and seasonings that I bring with me from the States.
All right, let's change gears a little bit. How safe is Venezuela, and did you feel safe?
So statistically, Venezuela is not very safe. If you look it up, it's not very safe. There's really no secret about that. However, I would say much of your life's routines focus around that question, is it safe? And so I would say when we were preparing to go out and do something, we would want to know, where are we going, who are we going with, what time are we going to come home, what's our transportation like? Because typically, as long as you can avoid being out on the streets, walking around or using public transportation too late in the day, you're gonna be okay using line taxis or obviously being in people's cars. And I would say being with Venezuelans, not just with expats, is really important in Venezuela because they know the safe or unsafe areas to go to and how late you should be out and where you should or shouldn't go. And so I think as long as you know and you have a working knowledge of safety there, you can make the right choices to stay safe.
Did you ever have any instances that something happened to you or know of something that happened to someone?
Yes, I had 2 instances where I was in danger, but thankfully I was fine. And I would say there were other instances where I would cross the street or avoid certain places because it just looked unsafe. And I think living in Venezuela, you do hear a lot of stories about things happening. And to be honest, I would say more instances of things happening to local people than to expat people. I'm not really sure why, but it's definitely, I think, more common to hear about that. Yeah.
Did you ever get pickpocketed or have anything stolen from you?
I had my phone stolen once. Yes.
From your hand?
Yes.
Your purse? From your hand?
Yes.
Okay. They just grabbed it and ran?
They asked me for it, yes.
Did they have a weapon?
Not that I saw.
Okay. All right, so changing things up again, how do you meet people there?
I met people mostly through my school and then meeting local Venezuelans and then meeting their friends. It's hard if you don't speak Spanish. It is hard to get to know people outside of the expat community. I had a lot of Venezuelan friends who were bilingual, and so they were able to translate for us, and I was able to make some friends outside of that community, but really through people at my work. So
would you recommend someone goes there with an intermediate Spanish level or higher, lower?
It definitely helps. I would say Venezuela, if you're going to live in Venezuela long term, and especially if you're going to live in Venezuela without support or without an agency that's prepared to help you, Spanish, most people in Venezuela do not speak English.
All right, what kinds of things did you do for fun?
So Venezuela is a beautiful country. There's a lot to do there when it comes to nature, and there's a lot of mountains, and it's right along the coast, so there's the beach not too far from the capital. So we would go to the beach, we would go up to the mountains. I wouldn't say a lot, but it's definitely accessible if you have a car, which is sometimes tricky, but not impossible there. And I think we would mostly go out to different malls or out to eat. Once again, safety played a big part in that, but the safest places to be were malls or movie theaters. They get most of the big movies down there, so it's fun to go to those and things like that.
What is healthcare like, and would you feel confident getting a procedure done in a hospital there?
I would say they have very well trained doctors. They have highly trained doctors. With the situation there right now, I would say no. I would not feel comfortable having a procedure done there. Simply not because I don't trust the doctors, but simply because there's a lack of materials and to actually do it successfully.
So would you get something minor done? Like if you're sick,
Yeah,
can you go
absolutely.
take medicine but maybe not have a surgery?
Yes, exactly.
And do the doctors speak English?
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes.
And with your job, was healthcare covered? So it was cheap, free?
Yeah, it was pretty much free. It's cheap there because of how the government works, and so it's really cheap to get healthcare done there, but not always super safe. So, yeah.
Earlier you were talking about flights in and out of Venezuela. Would you say that it's a good travel hub?
If you know why you're going and if you have people there who are prepared to go with you, who actually live there and who know their way around. Could I go there? Absolutely, because I have people there who would pick me up from the airport, I would stay with, who know where to go, what to do. But I would say if you don't know people there, it would be a challenging place to navigate.
And then outside of Venezuela, maybe a couple of other South American countries, is it easy to get to those? Easy, cheap?
I would say that the easiest and the cheapest is to go to the Caribbean. So like Aruba, Curacao, those islands right off the coast of Venezuela, they're really only, I would say, about an hour flight and fairly cheap. You can get a flight for maybe $150 more or less. And so those were probably the cheapest places to go. And then Colombia is pretty easy to access also.
Okay, lastly, can you tell us a couple pros and a couple cons of living in Venezuela?
So I would say the best thing about Venezuela is the people. I love Venezuelans. They are the kindest, most generous, most thoughtful people, and getting to know them, they just make you their family, and that's a really special part of the culture there. And I would say the other big pro of living in Venezuela is that the weather is amazing. It's the best weather I've ever lived in, and it's really nice to know that it's going to be warm but never too hot. It's just a really culturally diverse place for expats, I think, because you really get to know the culture, because you really have to. It's not very westernized, things like they don't really speak English, and so you're gonna have to learn Spanish, and so it's challenging, but it's really a cool place.
All right, Emily, thanks so much for telling us about Venezuela today.
Thanks.